Welcome back to Diet Debunk here at Hippocrates Health Institute. My name is Lindsay. I am here with world-renowned nutrition expert Dr. Clement, and we are going to be talking to you today about none other than dietary guidelines. Yes, the rules that people put in place to make sure that you're eating the things that they think that you should eat, and we're going to be talking all about it. Brian, first thoughts on dietary guidelines?
Well, the only one that ever told me what to eat was my mama, and boy, was she wrong. So if my mama was wrong, can you imagine the government?
I mean, I'm sure at least her intentions were good, right?
That's for sure. She did love me. I don't know how much with the food she fed me, or quote food she fed me.
I mean, I know my own parents, they raised me relatively healthfully, but of course when I was a teenager, the first time I ever got to put my hands on white bread, I think I almost ate the whole loaf. It was not good.
See that?
Yep.
That's what happened. That's why you have such a pale...
Yeah, that's why. Well, I went back to my roots eventually. So we're going to go right into now what is happening, the new changes with the dietary guidelines, what's on the table. This comes from an article that was produced by the New York Times, and it was titled "Scientific Panel on New Dietary Guidelines Draws Criticism from Health Advocates." And basically what this article is talking about is that there is now a panel, as there is every year, to review what the dietary guidelines will be for the next 5 years. So the New York Times reports, the guidelines updated every 5 years by the Department of Agriculture and Department of Health and Human Services have long prompted jousting among nutrition advocates and food industry interests, like pork producers and soda companies seeking to influence the final document. But the process this year is especially fraught given that Trump's administration's skepticism of science and its well-established deference to corporate interests. So essentially, more than half of this year's panel has ties to the food industry, and the scientists leading newly created subcommittees such as on pregnant women, lactating mothers, and toddlers have ties to something like the baby food industry. So, Brian, from what you've heard so far, what's the conspiracy here?
Well, this is an ongoing conspiracy. So what you have to know is when we say something is fraught, that's a lovely way to say completely corrupt and stinks like a rotten fish. And that's what you have. As a matter of fact, this year I thought about going up to this hearing, and a lot of my colleagues were there, scientists, doctors, PhDs, with valid data, science that we know will help prevent cancers, heart disease, diabetes, and a wide array of other disorders. But who had a louder voice was the friends of the administration. The food industry, or the make-believe food industry, or as they like to say, the false food industry. Science is out the window. No more science. Bullshit is what we now eat and we buy. And if you want the government to guide you on what to eat, also you should let them take care of everything in your life. You should just lay back on your couch, watch television. No longer will you have to do anything. You can just be there and they can manage your existence. And if you believe they can do a good job at that, go ahead. Eat those hot dogs, their suggestions, and chicken, their suggestion. And the genetically modified food, their suggestion. And chemically derived food. And it drives me nuts, this stuff does. Because this is dangerous. This is life and death problems that we're discussing.
It really is. And you know, something that's been making a lot of people mad about this specific panel is the fact that some questions have been completely omitted. So some of the questions that previously were asked about salt consumption and certain meat consumption, red meat consumption, those questions have been completely left out. So there's no longer an ability to kind of weigh what your thoughts are on them before those guidelines are made. And to me, that's a big sign that it's not quite as subjective or not quite as objective as we might like it to be.
Well, it's like giving somebody a test that they haven't studied for. And so my colleagues, who are some of the most equipped nutritional scientists on the planet Earth, these people are the premier scientists, were there in front of this so-called committee and literally talked about science, but we're restricted from talking about the latest data, which is even more problematic for the mainstream food industry. And so we've got to make major changes in this. And I can tell you, if you don't take charge of your health and your diet, you're going to be in deep, deep problems.
And these dietary guidelines are actually what shape a lot of federal programs. And those are the programs that deal with, the foods that are in prisons, that the military gets, and then also, most importantly, that our children get in public school systems. So this is a big one for me, because it's like, out of anyone who should be taking care of the children who maybe they don't have the resources for their parents to be able to be providing them the right meals or whatever that might be, the parents are allowing them to be in our hands to take care of with these meals, right? And so we should be feeding them the best possible things unto our knowledge that we can to, help them grow the best that they can in those really important years of their lives. And so, Brian, when it comes to childhood nutrition, what are your thoughts on that? And what does a good childhood diet really look like?
Well, this is a frightening subject, and one that I really want to delve deeply into. You have to remember, in the developmental years, your brain, your bones, your organ systems, your blood cells are all being created and being developed. If we don't nourish you at that point, you end up with old diseases like rickets and a wide array of problems. We know that children that ate large amounts of sugar as they were developing have double and triple the amount of cancers in their 20s and 30s. We know the obesity level go through the ceiling on these poor kids. The other thing you touched on was really important, that many, many million of American children and other people around the world are only depending upon nutrition they get in school. Mm-hmm. Now, recently we were on our way to giving good nutrition to our kids in public school systems. That was completely rolled back by the current administration. They are totally in bed. They must be making love 24 hours a day to these evil folks that are making plastic substances that you think are food. You are eating nonsense that literally is going to give you disease, and who's going to pay for that? You're going to pay for that, not them. Believe me, I know these people because all of them come here to Hippocrates and eat this way privately without you knowing about it.
Wow, yeah, that's really powerful. So in this year, particularly with the coronavirus pandemic, it has fueled a greater sense of urgency over the guidelines, given the emerging research suggesting that people with diet-related illnesses like type 2 diabetes, hypertension, and cardiovascular disease have significantly higher risk of developing serious complications from COVID-19. So they're really feeling the weight, essentially, of this year and of providing the best guidelines possible. So Brian, as it relates to wellness and our immunity, I know we've talked about this before, but what are some things that should really be looked at critically with diet?
Well, the most important thing you have to understand is that when you're eating plant-based foods that are organic, they bring oxygen to your body. Everyone that's dying of this virus and becoming really, really ill have low oxygen levels, be it from cardiovascular problems or diabetes or obesity, cancers. These are people who literally inherently have low oxygen levels. So that's the first and foremost problem. How about the building of the human cell? Your immune system happens to be cells, a gathering of cells, eosinophils, basophils, neutrocytes, grandocytes. Every one of those need to be nourished. Think of yourself if I don't feed you for 6 or 7 weeks. What you'd be like. You'd be dragging. You couldn't walk. You couldn't sit up. You couldn't speak clearly. That's what you're doing to your cells if you malnourish them. And furthermore, many people today are drinking fluid that is loaded with deadly chemicals, preservatives. But the worst of all is the sugar in the high fructose corn syrup that is actually lowering oxygen levels and feeding up the development of the virus. Remember, viruses, like sick people, love sugar. So you want that virus to grow, or any virus, or any bacteria, or any fungus, or any yeast, or any cancer to grow, let me tell you, eat sugar.
So the year of the dietary guidelines has not come out yet. So there's going to be a release for the 2020 to 2025 guidelines. So we don't have those quite yet, but what we do have is the information, the key points from 2015 to 2020. So we're going to look at those really quick to kind of see what we have had so far in the past, and then also give you our recommendations for what we think a greater Hippocrates style dietary guidelines might be. So we're going to look at this really quick. So their key recommendations were for a variety of vegetables from all the subgroups: dark green, red, and orange, legumes, beans and peas, starchy, and other. So Brian, I don't know about you, but I'm not mad at that section.
No, that's very good, actually. If they said organic, we'd be happier.
Yep, we absolutely. The next, they say fruits, especially whole fruits. And, you know, obviously we want to limit our sugar during certain times, especially if you're dealing with a health challenge such as cancer. But in general, whole fruits, I mean, I think it's pretty good.
Much better idea than candy bars.
Absolutely. So next, they say grains, at least half of which are whole grains. Again,
wrong. With that one, we have to get a little fussy.
a little bit more fussy.
What do you mean half? He says denatured, disease-causing, sugar-creating, non-whole grains? Nope. Whole grains should be 100%. And non-glutinous whole grains would be better.
Absolutely. And if you had sprouted grains,
Whoa,
I mean,
now we're into the
elite next level
section.
Yeah, that's the platinum lifestyle. You can live here
the
in Hippocrates.
lectins go away, and the enzyme inhibitors, and all these new people who are out there scaring the heck out of you. They'll go away too.
Yep, it's amazing, the sprouted grains. All right, so then next, now this is where I start to have a little bit of a problem with this list. They say fat-free or low-fat dairy, including milk, yogurt, cheese, and/or fortified soy beverages, which is interesting. They put a plant-based option in there, but generally they're saying fat-free or low-fat dairy.
That was to pacify the handful of people that became moral vegans.
Yeah.
But let me say this to you, that in my book, Dairy Deception, I write about a study that was showing when they gave people low-fat dairy food, they became fatter. Isn't that amazing?
It's amazing.
We're saying no dairy food should ever be consumed, but somehow when they take the fat out, it puts a switch on in your genetics and allows the body to start maintaining more weight as almost fight and flight. You're being chased by something. So stay away from all of that. That's not a good recommendation. That's a good recommendation for the profits of the dairy industry.
Yeah.
Period.
Yep, absolutely. And one of the last ones they have here, they say a variety of protein foods, including seafood, lean meats, poultry, eggs, legumes. They did put the beans back in there, beans and peas, nuts, seeds, and soy products. So obviously the latter half of the list a little bit better than the beginning of the list, but you know they're coming right out there with the seafood and lean meats and poultry and eggs.
Well, I think the United States always likes to call ourselves number one. We're the best, we're the smartest, we're the biggest brain trust. But remember this, Canada pulled it together. Just in the last 12 months, Canada put together a semblance of a food pyramid that's almost healthy. Can you imagine that?
Wow.
So our great brothers and sisters to the north that have only 30-some million people versus 330 million people understand how to eat better than those of us who grow most of the food. So maybe next time we can say, you don't have to have that gathering of people who know nothing from nothing. Just look at what other countries are doing who are civil, who really want to make the citizens of their country happy and healthy.
Great point.
Yeah.
And so last, they just have on here oils, which is kind of a vague point to end with, but what oils would people really want to stay away from in particular?
Well, pretty much any oil, not pretty much, but completely, any oil that comes from an animal.
Yeah.
So everything I grew up on. They used to fry, you take an animal and fry it in butter, which was from an animal. Saturated fat, horribly bad. Now, the other little secret about oils and fats can get you thin. And so healthy essential fats that come from plants, they're locked into the cell of plants, are actually good for the brain, good for the nervous system, good for the immune system, and for your energy. They actually help you lose weight. Can you imagine that?
Wow.
And we do a whole program here and show you the science on that. And when you understand how incredibly important essential fatty acids are, they become so prominent in the science of nutrition today that nobody can overlook the dynamics. But remember, it all has to be plant-based, and even good organic plant-based oils should never be cooked. Once you cook them, they become heart disease causing and cancer causing.
That's a great point. Yeah. So, Brian, to kind of wrap this up, if Hippocrates were to come out with the dietary guidelines for the United States to follow for 2020 to 2025, what would be on those guidelines according to your understanding?
Well, what we'd have to do is start with a 5-year fast to clean all the nonsense out that Americans have been eating their entire life. Let's put them on a fast for 5 years. Now we get them all down to reasonable weight levels at that stage. I'm joking about that. But for most of you, it would be like a fast, because we'd be making the main course what you thought was the appetizer, the salad. We'd be making the whole grain that's germinated, as Lindsay just said, something really important, because it is a complete protein. Has all the vitamins, the minerals, the essential fats in there, and it's so inexpensive. There's nobody in the United States, including the 750,000 children that go to bed hungry every night in the United States of America, the richest country in the world, they could afford these things. But what we have to do is get big agri and big food industry out of the way. They're more concerned about their profits than they are the health of Americans. I'm so tired of these people saying they're patriots. They're patriots, or they can wave the flag all day long, to actually keep themselves cool. But it's not cool what they're doing, I'm going to tell you.
Yeah.
You've got to give people nutrition. Every single country in the world that's civil, that cares for the future of their country, understands its very basic premise. And I've had the privilege to live in some of those countries. I am proud to be an American, but I'm not proud of the way our government works with these evil people who are out to get you sick. It's a vicious cycle. They give you fast food, and then the next thing you know, you're buying a pharmaceutical drug. And look at the commercials on your mainstream TV.
Yeah.
One is a fast food, the next one's a drug. And if you don't get off that crazy cycle, you're going to end up dying, and they're going to profit from your death and suffering.
Absolutely. And it's just wild to me how much we've really fed into the whole idea of, fast food being not that bad for us, the meat being not that bad, the dairy being not that bad. And that's all been pre-planned for us to believe based on the media that we're consuming on a regular basis, the input that's coming in from all around us. And it's really important, not for only us to be educated, but for the country to follow the science that exists out there supporting a plant-based diet. Yeah. And I think it's really interesting how many people don't realize that the plant-based diet is so scientifically validated in terms of the studies that come out and show that if you're eating meat, if you're eating lots of dairy, it's very black and white with these are the health challenges that you're going to get. You have more likely a chance of getting diabetes. You're probably going to get this kind of coronary, like this artery disease, and it's very clear. And I think a lot of people think it's subjective because, the plant-based movement was kind of birthed out of the 60s and the 70s, and so it must be kind of hippy-dippy and it can't be scientific. It is extremely scientific what we do here. And Brian, you have a few books all on just the science of what we do.
I write every one of my books is substantiated with the latest data in science. There's nothing I ever utter or nothing I ever write that's not backed by absolute science. As a matter of fact, sometimes I read 50 to 100 studies before I'll put one fact in a book. I spend laborious hours doing this so that we cannot be criticized. And by the way, it was born out of the 60s and 70s. We're the grown-ups now. We're the scientists. We're the people who are the academics. We're the people running the universities. Why the heck wouldn't we be doing the right thing? Because sadly, the biggest voice is the guy with the biggest wallet. And that's still a problem. The United States of America was built on people who did hard work and brought back what we called freedom. Today, it's being run by a corrupt group of mobsters that we call corporate leaders that care nothing about you and your family, but care about how much money they have. That's why we went from a large amount of people who were the middle class to a dwindling amount of the middle class. And by the way, less than 1% of the population now has most of the money.
Wow.
Do you realize that a handful of families have 50% of the money in America? Half of the Americans living in the United States, so half the Americans would actually mean about 160 million American people have this total amount of money that a handful of families have. Why? Because you're eating their nonsense. You're going into their doctor offices. You're taking their pharmaceutical drugs. In the United States, do you realize we only have 4% of the world's population? We take 50% of the pharmaceutical drugs because of that crap you're eating that your government says is food? Wake up.
That's so good, Brian. And you know what? The dietary guidelines, okay, like that's a step for some people. But the thing is, you know, we are all responsible for knowing what our own dietary guidelines are, despite whoever publishes whatever information it is. Right. Whether it be the government, whether that be the magazine you like to read, whether that be the latest diet fad that comes out, we're all responsible for knowing what the truth is to make our bodies, to make the things that are carrying us through this lifetime as healthy and as good as they can be. So while dietary guidelines are good and we don't want people to be hearing the wrong information, the right information is available for you, and you just have to go out there and seek it and find it.
Yeah, well, we're here for you. You can come and visit us here at Hippocrates, read one of our 30 books, watch Hippocrates TV, or the multitude of videos that we've made over decade after decade informing you. And we're here to help you move into the future, a bright future, a happy future, a healthy future. Till next time, Diet Debunked.